Welcome to worship with Eliot Unitarian Chapel. Wherever you are tuning in from, near or far, we are delighted that you're with us. I am Eliot's lead minister, the Reverend Barbara Gadon, and I hope that this is a service that nurtures your spirit. If you are new to us, we are an intentional community that welcomes all races, all genders, all sexual orientations. We welcome people of all creeds and beliefs, all economic circumstances, and all types of families. From these differences, we believe that we bloom and grow. If you would like to learn more about our congregation and connect with us in real time, please look for information at the end of the service. Welcome. I now light this chalice, symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith. And hear these words by the Reverend David Breeden. In this time of loss, in this time of asking why, we light a flame of sharing. We light a flame of commitment. In this time of why, we light this flame, sign of our searching, sign of our sharing, sign that together we remember. Together we ask why. Together in sadness and joy, we share light. Come, let us worship.
May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be peaceful and at ease. May I be whole. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be peaceful and at ease. May you be whole. May we be filled with loving kindness. May we be well. May we be filled with loving kindness. May we be well. May we be peaceful and at ease. May we be whole.
Grief is like spaghetti and meatballs. Grief is like spaghetti and meatballs. There are a lot of different feelings on one plate. The strongest emotions you have are the meatballs. The sauce is grief. Grief is the feeling and thoughts you go through when you lose someone you love. All sauces are not the same. Not everyone deals with death the exact same way either. You are the plate. Plates need to be strong. How do you eat your spaghetti and meatball grief? Do you eat the whole thing at one time? No, you only eat one bite at a time. When you deal with losing someone you love, you may need to take one day at a time. Sometimes you may need to take smaller bites by dealing with things 1 hour or even 1 minute at a time. It's okay to give your grief a water break sometimes. Taking time to do something you enjoy can be healing. How full of grief is your plate? Soak up the grief sauce with some bread. Get a slice of self-care. Spaghetti and meatball grief may not have been what you ordered from the menu, but you don't have to eat alone. Thank you for joining us for Time for All Ages. This is Miss Christie. No matter what we're all going through, just remember, we are not alone.
Our reading this week is from a book called The Poetry of Presence, an anthology of mindfulness poems. I was given this book as a gift, and I highly recommend it. I've taken to reading a poem each morning. This is a poem called The Cure for It All by Julia Fehrenbacher. Go gently today. Don't hurry or think about the next thing. Walk with the quiet trees. Can you believe how brave they are? How kind? Model your life after theirs. Blow kisses at yourself in the mirror. Especially when you think you've messed up. Forgive yourself for not meeting your unreasonable expectations. You are human, not God. Don't be so arrogant. Praise fresh air, clean water, good dogs. Spin something from joy. Open a window, even if it's cold outside. Sit, close your eyes, breathe. Allow the river of it all to pulse through eyelashes, fingertips, bare toes. Breathe in and breathe out until you feel your bigness, until the sun rises in your veins. Breathe until you stop needing anything to be different. So ends the reading. Every month, Eliot Chapel splits our offering with a local organization that promotes our values and furthers our mission. In May, we have been supporting Project Backpack. Project Backpack has been serving at-risk children in St. Louis since 1999. They provide social workers and police with backpacks filled with necessities and comfort items for children. The backpacks are delivered to the children at the scene when they are needed most, and they make a huge difference for them when they are being removed from their homes in difficult situations and being taken to safety. Usually they're doing this with nothing but the clothes on their backs. There are instructions for giving on your screen. Please give generously. You can make a difference. We are a nation in grief. We who are alive in this moment, we are survivors, at least for this day. And to be a survivor is not to congratulate yourself, but to recognize that you have faced a significant threat to your life. And it is to know that others have not, and to grieve. One day in April, my friend Nancy asked me to pray for her cousin, Cynthia. Cynthia had gotten the coronavirus and was in the hospital. Now, I talked to Nancy several times a week, and every day I would get updates. Now Cynthia was in the ICU, and now she was on a ventilator. And one day they got some encouraging news that she might be improving. And the next day I got a text. Can't talk today. Cynthia died. Well, I called her anyway, and my friend could barely talk. She just kept saying, not my Cynthia. No, not her. This was her, as she called her, her sister cousin, the one that she has adopted since she was 5. Not my Cynthia, she said. And just when you would normally start the rituals of grief, the gestures and the things that you do to heal, quarantine and an overloaded system got in the way. Now, this was Detroit. Cynthia's family had to wait a full week before that they could tend to her body. Meanwhile, another cousin died, and a third was admitted to the ICU in Alabama. And this is one of those extended families that would normally drop everything to be with one another. And they were frozen in their grief, much like a lot of us. We may not be grieving a loved one who's died from the virus, but we grieve nonetheless. All kinds of things. Losing a job, we've lost so many things, a job, a business. We have lost being able to attend a wedding or a graduation in person. We miss children's sports. We miss hugging our parents, being there to help them. There's much to grieve about the way our lives used to be and how they are now. Just the other day, I was coming home from a dental appointment that was overdue, and I had this impulse to stop at the produce stand in Webster Groves, and I couldn't do it. I was not feeling safe. And I'll bet you've had moments like that, and the fear that it will never be easy again. That's grief. To honor grief, we must take time to feel grief. Grief is a complex response to a traumatic loss. It isn't any one feeling. It could be sadness. It could be loneliness or isolation. It could be lethargy or loss of energy. It could be just being disoriented or feeling a lack of purpose. Anybody feel any of these over the last few months? You are in grief. Now, our culture is good at getting us to minimize our grief. It's been that way for a long, long time. We're told to squash our grief in a lot of ways. Stay positive, look on the bright side. Other people have it so much worse than me. And none of those things in and of themselves are bad, but they also encourage us collectively to deny that we feel anything, that if we feel some kind of grief, that there's something wrong with us. Now, add to that the expectations that are being held of so many people right now. Who has time for feelings? If you can work from home, you're expected to be just as productive, even if you're taking care of a 2-year-old. If you can't work from home, if you have to go into work and be on the job, you're not supposed to complain or be worried about exposure. If you've been on the job or returning, you may be grieving coworkers who have gotten the virus or who have died. And you grieve for the days that you could go to work. And the biggest thing on your mind was dealing with that one coworker. You know the one I mean. We are all, in some ways, grieving the life that came before this one. And we get the message that we're not really supposed to. By the time you hear this, 100,000 Americans will have died from COVID-19. And there's every indication that this is an underestimated number, that there have been more, but they were misattributed to other deaths. 100,000. We have surpassed the number of American casualties from 19 years of involvement in the Vietnam War. And we've done it in just 5 months. We're on our way to doubling that too. How do you take that in? How can you feel that in your heart? It may help to visualize it. 100,000 people is about 4 times the size of Kirkwood. And there are stadiums that seat 100,000. Picture a stadium full of fans at a football game, and then picture it empty. I saw some footage from the 2008 rally for presidential candidate Barack Obama in St. Louis, and the crowd was estimated at 100,000. So imagine all of the people filling up the streets around the arch, where you can probably guess where this was filmed, full up, and now picture those streets empty, all those people gone. 100,000 Americans lost, and yet there has been no national recognition, no flags flown at half-mast, no ceremonies where we speak the value and the preciousness of these lives lost. One of the feelings associated with grief is anger. Yes, anger. A lot of us are angry about this. If we had shut down sooner, one study pointed out, we could have saved 36,000 lives. It's perfectly reasonable to be angry right now. It is part of the grief. More numbers. Across America, African Americans are 3 times more likely to die of the virus than whites. In Missouri, Blacks are dying at 5 times the rate of whites. Now, in the week that we started hearing about these numbers, this gross discrepancy, this obvious difference, something changed in the public conversation about the coronavirus. Journalist Adam Serwin writes in the Atlantic Monthly, on April 7th, major outlets began reporting the preliminary data that showed Black and Latino Americans were being disproportionately felled by the coronavirus. That night, the Fox News host Tucker Carlson announced, it hasn't been the disaster that we feared. His colleague Britt Hume mused that the disease turned out not to be quite as dangerous as we thought. White nationalists began mass protests at state capitals around that time to end quarantine. They knew people would die, but they were convinced that it was not going to be them. It was not going to be someone that they knew. They did not think of the people dying as their people. Now, this is the extreme. It is the extreme. But since so many white people do not personally know and are not related to Black people, including me, many people who look like me simply cannot comprehend the magnitude of this loss. Now, my friend Nancy and her cousin Cynthia happen to be African American. Nancy and I have been close friends for 8 years now, and I care deeply that she's suffering. And yet I realized in that one moment, I don't feel this in the same way that she does. I can't. It's not as personal to me, not just because of the individual loss, but to somehow a loss of my personhood, my community. There we were, looking at each other across the racial divide. I grieve for that. I grieve for the divide and for all the things that make it possible. Disparities in healthcare and access to insurance. Racial bias in medicine that has shown up in Black people with symptoms being sent home instead of being admitted to the hospital. And the grief of their families wondering, what if my loved one had been white? Would it have been different? I grieve. There's the vulnerability of people in service jobs and the lack of care for their well-being. There's mass incarceration that, as we know, has grossly disproportionate numbers of Black people. Now, it is tempting to make comparisons among griefs, to say that one grief is more important or more serious than another, it counts for more. I don't think that's useful, though. Instead, I would rather ask us to bear witness to one another's griefs, to people who are like you and not like you, and to share them, just share them, feel them. Perhaps to see our suffering as part of the great suffering of our country right now, of the world. Nothing more, nothing less. We must take time to hear what people are going through and to feel something, to feel with them. I believe it is possible. As the poet Julia Fehrenbacher wrote, to walk among the quiet trees and see how brave they are, how kind. And I believe, as she said, that we can model our lives after them. I trust that we can be big enough and strong enough to do that, to be strong enough to keep working for it and fighting for it, to end it for everybody, for everybody. There's room for all, and all must be honored. May it be so. Amen. I invite you to join me now in a ritual of grieving, if you are willing, of sharing your grief with the grief of the world. I have a bowl here, and a bowl is a container. Grief needs a container, or we get a little nervous that it's going to go everywhere and overwhelm us. So let this bowl be the container for our grief. I also have some stones. Each stone has weight and mass. And grief needs a feeling of being grounded and being visible. And finally, in the bowl, you may have noticed, is some water. And water symbolizes the community that washes over the stones. And at some point, someday, makes them smooth. As I place each stone in the water, I'm going to name some of the things that I know people are grieving now. We hold these griefs with you. Listen for something that sounds like what you're thinking about, what you're feeling, but also pay close attention to the things that are different from you. We'll hold them together. This stone is for people who have lost a loved one during the pandemic, for whatever cause, and could not be with their loved ones, their family, to mourn. This stone is for all of the other important in-person rituals that we could not have this year. Graduations, weddings, yearly family traditions. This stone is for people who have lost a job or a business or some measure of economic security. This one is for families, especially young children who have lost their daily sense of normalcy and safety, and for their grandparents who long to hug them. This stone is for those of us who miss going to church. This stone is for the Black lives that we have lost and cherish and miss. Here is a stone for your personal grief. Whatever name you might put to it, it's yours. It deserves a place. This stone is for all 100,000 Americans that we have lost and grieve, and for their families. And finally, this stone is for the 336,000 people all over the world whom we have lost to the virus. May their families find peace. Amen. In the Jewish tradition, people mourning a loved one say the mourner's Kaddish for the one who has died. It's a prayer for the dead. I learned this Kaddish when I went on retreat to an international retreat in Auschwitz to bear witness to those who had died in Auschwitz. It was to honor people for whom probably no one had said Kaddish. Either their family was gone or their family didn't know that they died. And people of all faiths joined in this prayer. I heard it in Hebrew, I heard it in English, German, Polish, Japanese. Everyone was invited to join in to say this prayer that stated that these lives mattered, that these souls were worthy of mourning. It begins, Yitgadal Yitgadash, exalted and hallowed be God's name. Kaddish says nothing about the person who died, nor does it express anything of the pain and suffering of the loss. And it sort of baffles some people who come to it when it's not their tradition. But this prayer, I'm told, is said to honor someone's life, to say that this life mattered. It has grand language, one rabbi explained, because it's meant to bring us into a larger context than just our own life, our own limited point of view. It gives us a container to hold our shaky selves, our shattered hearts. The Reverend Julie Ann Silberman Bunn, a UU minister of Jewish heritage, wrote a Kaddish for UUs to say. She wrote a humanist Kaddish. And this poem, or this prayer, has moments in it where, like the traditional one, people say Amen. And if you like, you can join in the Amens. Let the glory of all life be extolled. Let creation be hallowed in the world whose creation surrounds us. May one world soon prevail in our own day, our own lives, and the life of all who live. And let us say, Amen. Let all life be blessed, as all life is glorified, exalted, and honored beyond all the praises, songs, and adorations we can utter. The world is a wonder beyond our understanding. And let us say, Amen. For us and all nature, may the blessing of peace and the promise of life come true. And let us say, Amen. May peace reign in the highest and lowest places. Let peace descend upon us all and all the world. And let us say, Amen.
Comfort me, comfort me, comfort me, oh my soul.
Now may the love which overcomes all differences, which heals all wounds, which puts to flight all fears, and reconciles all who are separated, be in us and among us, now and always. Remember, I love you. Go in peace.